particularly, what do you think are the key conclusions from the recent IPCC report?
The IPCC report, the one that has been published in Stockholm from the Working Group 1, which is dedicated to science, make few very clear conclusions. One is that the current warming is still there. There is no pause, as has been said in some instances. And the anthropogenic effect, that is the influence of human activity on this climate change, is absolutely clear from scientific evidence. Some of the most obvious and fully appalling impact of climate change is both the intensification of natural hazards. I think we may develop this a bit further during the interview. There has been also a minimum free of ice in the Arctic this summer, which is now a recurrent phenomenon. There have been obviously droughts and flooding all around the world. So I mean, all the science is consistent and coherent. And as many may know, the global warming is created by the heat-trapping gas in the atmosphere, what we call the greenhouse gases, basically CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, just to name a few. But there are also other species which are very important in terms of the effect on the radiative forcing. So all the human activity so far has not been developed on a track which will curb both the emission and the concentration in the atmosphere, which makes the situation from a certain perspective worse for many countries, especially the developing country. And during this conference of the party of the UNFCCC, obviously there is a great momentum to try for every parties developing country to reach an agreement for a better world.
So how do you see the current trend in greenhouse gas emissions and atmospheric concentrations?
The atmospheric concentration of the greenhouse gases is obviously a direct result of the emission, of course. All gases don't have the same residence time in the atmosphere, but if you take the carbon dioxide, it has many centuries of residence in the atmosphere. That is what has been emitted from the beginning of the industrial era. Some of it is still in the atmosphere. But don't forget that half of it goes into the ocean, and a part goes also on land and is taken by obviously the canopy to have trees growing. This is why deforestation is a key issue in the conference. So unfortunately, despite economical crises of the last years, which have seen a slight decline in the industrial activity or transport activity or land activity as well, which are the main responsible for this emission. The emission have still been increasing, and as a consequence, the content of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is still increasing. Recently, we, WMO, have been publishing a report on this state of affairs as far as 2012 is concerned, but we can predict without any chance to be wrong that next year, this year, 2013, will also beat new records.
Right. You touched earlier on the sort of recent extreme weather conditions we've been having, or weather events, let's say. What's the link between climate change and these extreme conditions?
This is something which has many aspects or dimensions. The IPCC report stressed once and again that the frequency, intensity of major extreme event is likely to increase. But when you take any individual event, including the last cyclone in the Philippines, it's difficult to relate it just to climate change, because there are many aspects which could contribute to have a cyclone, a bigger intensity or a different track as usual. But certainly the fact that the ocean is warmer, because don't forget that the ocean is absorbing almost 93% of the heat that is related to the excess of heat trapping by the greenhouse gases. So the ocean is warmer, the atmosphere is warmer as well in the troposphere at least, because in stratosphere it's colder, but in the troposphere, that is lower part of the atmosphere, it's warmer. That means the water content is higher. So there is a good recipe here to have obviously more intense precipitation. There is also, it's like in a car, if you put better petrol in the reservoir, you may have better performance of the engine. And if I could use this comparison, this is what is occurring in the atmosphere. But in terms of the impact of these dramatic events, and you have seen this with Sandy, or you have seen that in the Philippines, it's, for example, the sea level rise, which is one of the main causes of devastating impact. You have just to realize that, for example, in the case of Sandy, the sea level is 20 centimeters higher than it was at the time when the main airborne facilities around New York were constructed. In the Philippines, it's worse, if I say so. That is, the Philippine region has experienced more quick sea level rise than average, almost 3 times faster than the average, which means that in the last 70 years, the sea level has risen by 35 centimeters or more. And that's obviously when you have such high wind and created wave and storm surge, obviously the inland penetration of sea is much deeper inland, and that's caused obviously a lot of disaster. And on an island where population are vulnerable but have no major place to shelter themselves, obviously that cause a dramatic impact.
Right. So is it actually possible to attribute certain extreme events to climate change rather than to the variability?
This is a challenging question in terms of science. As I say, you have to realize that if you want to have a very full and direct answer to your question, it could be in terms of scenario or in a probabilistic way. What the IPCC has been saying from the very first report is that the likelihood of more extreme event is likely to happen, and this is what we see. So if you take the ensemble of or the complete set of extreme events, you will see that on average they are evolving more intense, more frequent for some of them. And I speak, for example, about drought and flooding, because one of the striking result of the IPCC report is that the areas on the world which are humid will become more humid. The ones which are dry are likely to become drier. So flooding and drought as the two faces of the same phenomenon, climate change. So if you look at the statistics, what the IPCC has been saying is verifying on the ground. But if you take any single event, you cannot attribute it all to just climate change. And that's absolutely right that we are in a period, because of different things, including astronomical parameter of the sun, we are in what we used to call an optimal solar period, which means that the variability is quite high, because this is the maximum of energy, solar energy, within the years. So the variability is still very high, and this can be seen even on very solid parameters, and the surface average temperature, which is the indicator which is used especially by the negotiators to try to come into an agreement. From year to year, especially if you have El Nino or La Nina phenomena, that is this warming pool of water in the Pacific, or if you have a La Nina, which has a cooling effect, then you see that from year to year, even this very strong parameter, robust parameter, has annual variability. So in any part of the world, the variability is still very important from season to season or month to month and year to year. So it's a combined effect of climate change and climate variability, noting that the climate change itself enhances the variability. Right. So this is why it's even trickier to separate the two things.
Has there been a hiatus, therefore, in greenhouse warming?
in greenhouse warming, what we see today is something which certainly in terms of values, intensity, and speed of evolution, nothing that has been observed in the last 800,000 years. So this things which is quite new. And when there are attempts to try to reference to past period, whether it's on sea level rise or other things, you have to realize that people talk of a completely different world in terms of both atmospheric composition, lung occupation, and everything. So generally, they are mixing apple and oranges.
Yeah. So looking forward, what would you say are the clear priorities for sort of climate science research and an observation over the coming years?
We still have to better inform the science, that is to make new research available. We still need a better infrastructure into the observation, whether it's on land or whether it's obviously through space observation, which is now providing a lot of information with the advantage of being continuous in time and covering the entire globe, whether it's obviously orbiting satellite or geostationary satellite. So we still need this infrastructure of observation and capacity in terms of human capacity, engineers, scientists to make use of this data, to develop the science, especially to answer the needs which are the more in demand, which, for example, focus on seasonal forecast. Because the reason why we, especially in our community, we are so enthusiastic and passionate about that, and that's why we have created the Global Framework for Climate Services, is because we believe that the science today is able to deliver useful information on seasonal or internal prediction. The scenarios as developed by the IPCC are also developed to give, I would say, the range of possible evolution of the climate on Earth. So depending on which sector you are interested, which type of investment, long-term investment you want to make, you may have a preliminary idea of the risk or opportunities that this trend would offer. But as far as the real, if you say so, future evolution of the climate is concerned, we are still in need of better information over land, over the ocean, because there are inertial processes. For example, I was quoting that the surface of the ocean is evolving, but globally is not evolving on a day-to-day basis. To influence the climate is a long trend which matters, and if you get this signal better, both at the surface but also in the deep ocean, then you are able to have a much more improved seasonal, internal forecast. So this is what we are pushing for: better infrastructure, more people to look at the research, develop science, and obviously a much quicker transfer from science into operation. And this Global Framework for Climate Services is just dedicated to this. Make sure that climate information, climate services exist, are available, and are used properly. So this is the ambition of this program, which is led by WMO, which is a collective initiative of the whole entire UN system, unanimously supported by all UN members.
Brilliant, Christian. So finally, just one more thing. What would you say are the climate change priorities for the WMO?
But the priorities that we have is again to coordinate the development and the maintenance, the enhancements and development in infrastructure and capacities, especially because 3 years ago, in conjunction with the World Climate Conference #3, which led to this creation of the Global Framework for Climate Services, we made a survey of the capability of our members, and it turns out that in 70 countries, there is no or just even less than basic capability to deliver climate information at the national level. So one of our first priority is to make sure that all our members are stepping up their capability to deliver these services, which are really needed to support whatever adaptation or mitigation plans they have, because what we think is that if decisions are not well informed by science, investment will be just wasted or geared in a wrong way, and you may have a detrimental effect rather than positive effect. Well, the IPCC has warned the world for quite a while of the likelihood of the impact of climate change. And unfortunately, you can see that we still have subsidies for non-sustainable activities, and which creates the problem. So we have to convince the decision makers, the political leaders, that time is now, as Christiana Figa said yesterday in one of his interventions, time is now to act. We cannot wait. We have been warned. The science is there. It may not be complete, but it's certainly strong enough to take a sensible decision informed by science to, as I said, a better world for the well-being of the entire world population.